Welcome to GDA Live. I am Gail Davis, and I am your host, and I want to thank each of you for joining us today. I am so excited for you to get to know our special guest, Cassandra Worthy. I met Cassandra last December, and I was like, whoa, this woman has some serious energy. I have to get to know her. And once I did, I was like, now I have to get her on GDA Live. So I am so happy we are able to make this happen today, and that each of you are going to get to know her. So Cassandra, welcome.
What it do, Gail? Good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Before we dive into our format, which is going to be Q&A, and I really want to do a shout out to the audience. We want your involvement. So as we're talking, please post questions in the chat. But before I do that, I'd like to tell you just a teeny bit about who Cassandra is. She is the founder and CEO of Change Enthusiasm Global, which is a growth enablement firm. She's a former Fortune 100 innovation leader, and I'm going to ask her to dive into that in a little bit more detail. She's a highly dynamic speaker. She's a chemical engineer, which is a disconnect for me, but maybe she can explain that. She's a two-time TEDx speaker, and she is the author of this amazing book. This book and her TED Talks often go into not only change, but her resiliency. So we're thrilled to have her here to talk today. And like I said, it's a moderated Q&A. So please be sure that you put your questions in the chat. Okay, so Cassandra, I know that there was a professional Cassandra before there was a speaker Cassandra. And I think that's really important because a lot of times our clients are curious about what makes a person credible to speak on a topic. So I think it would be really helpful if you would dive into your background before you got into speaking.
Sure, of course. And thank you again for having me. Honestly, this is just a great joy. And as I was mentioning to you before, when I looked at my calendar for the start of the week and I saw I get to talk to you and meet with the GDA client base, I was stoked. So thank you so much. But yes, and it's funny you talk about curiosity, something that has always stayed with me from as long as I can remember when I was very young, as an insatiable curiosity. I have always been just a curious person wanting to understand what I call the mysteries of life. So I asked all the hows, the whats, the wheres, the what fors. And I always tell folks that science and math found me because they armed me with these tools to answer so many of my questions. And so I gravitated towards those disciplines, science and math. And so engineering was a good fit for me. So I studied chemical engineering at Georgia Tech, got my degree, and then I spent nearly 15 years working in the consumer packaged goods industry, mostly at Procter & Gamble. And I also spent some time as an executive at Berkshire Hathaway in the Duracell business. And so I've been in that corporate landscape. I tell a lot of my clients, I've sat where your employees are sitting, because not only did I have those 15 years leading organizations, working in innovation, working in manufacturing, but I also experienced a lot of shift. And I went through two really major acquisitions, two of the biggest ever recorded in the CPG industry. And I was at one point, an employee with management going through that. Another time I was the manager who was leading organizations through these acquisitions. And so I personally experienced that pain, that frustration, that anger, that anxiety that we all feel when we're going through big change and disruption, that type of change that feels like it just smacks us across the face. We didn't ask for it. We're laying on the ground. And why? Why is this happening? And so I personally felt that, and I developed this mindset of change enthusiasm that I've since coined, really to help myself to grow and evolve through these really, really major disruptions. But then I started hearing people around me ask, Cassandra, how are you able to do this? How are you able to stay so upbeat, able to move your organizations through this in such a fulfilling and positive kind of way? And I realized this mindset, what I practice, I can figure out how to teach this and bring this to the world to make it better, to nurture humanity's resilience and adaptability in a way that can be very pragmatic and that anyone can practice, using my engineering mindset. And so that's what I did. And I actually built my speaking and training and development firm in parallel to leading huge organizations in innovation and consumer packaged goods.
When did you decide to go into speaking full time?
Oh, man. So to put it precisely, 2017. So I've always had this intuition, I think that we all get, that whisper that there was something bigger, there's something better for me to be sharing my gifts and talents with the world to make it a better place than leading innovation in corporate America. So that's all, that intuition has always been there. And to be quite blunt, it was when I fully stepped into sobriety, accepting my alcoholism, that intuition became louder and louder and louder. And so again, I started following curiosity. What could this be like? Why am I hearing this? And at first I thought I would just be a nonfiction self-help book writer. But eventually I found out about the speaking industry and I found myself on a stage and I got lit up. I got lit up. And when I got off that stage and felt this same light and energy that I feel flowing through me, when I saw that same energy spring out of somebody's face, out of somebody's eyes, out of their smile, and coming out of me, and it was like it was coming up to greet itself, that was a magic moment for me. And I knew this is what I'm meant to do. This is my purpose. And so it's been off to the races ever since.
That's awesome. So if you started in 2017, I assume you had a lot of in-person experience before the pandemic hit.
Yeah, I did. So I had a few engagements in 2018, really began to pick up in 2019. And I started to get a momentum going. And then of course, March 2020 hit. And it was such a fortuitous time, which is odd to say, but it was the time when I was about to launch the revamp of my website, offering new clarity on what Change Enthusiasm is all about, what it brings, as well as a new speaker reel. And it launched right when the pandemic was hitting and the world was closing, which was, again, was fortuitous because I was able to offer the clarity in that I faced the emotions of change, emotions that now the whole world was dealing with, and allowing the individual to harness the power of that emotion to fuel growth and evolution and becoming better through change and disruption. And so I think that I was at the right time, right place. And eventually, of course, I started getting into virtual. And now, I mean, I feel like things are wide open for in-persons, but it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah. What are you seeing now that we're getting back to in person? Are you noticing anything?
I'm seeing smiles and bright eyes. No, I'm seeing a lot of activity. It's so funny, you know, when we were looking at the calendar just this morning, and there's so many now, first holes, second holes, third holes. And so often I'm getting requests from clients for, you know, an engagement that's 4-6 weeks out, and I'm booked. Yeah. And of course, there's some flexibility if it's a virtual engagement. And I will tell you, I have done 2 engagements here in my home virtually, and then I get on a plane to go do an in-person the next day. Or I'm doing a virtual the same day as an in-person. So, you know, that's happened. And of course, virtual still lends some flexibility. But like I said, things have really, really picked up. And, you know, I'm sure you would agree, the sooner that you can reach out, if you know the date of your event, to get things in order, our industry has really, really picked up, which I'm so grateful for. I'm so grateful for.
Definitely picked up. Okay. So usually when I'm on the phone and, you know, I often will pitch a speaker just based on the way they make me feel.
Yeah.
But obviously a discerning buyer needs real clarity on what exactly is this speaker's topic.
Sure.
And often they also are curious, is there a preferred audience for this speaker, or do they like to be the opener, or do they like to be the closer? So if you can dive into any specificity on your topics or the ideal audiences, that would be really helpful to the people on the call.
So let me first say, you can put me at any time of the day. I don't care if I'm kicking off. I don't care if I'm right after lunch. I don't care if I'm closing you out. I still have a ball and a bring. Just know I'm going to bring a lot of energy, as well as practical application. But yeah, so of course, if you think about the umbrella of where I operate, it's around change, it's around resiliency, it's around dealing and growing through disruption. But uniquely, I face the emotions of change head on. And I'm really focused on the individual and arming them with the means, with a mindset, with tools and strategies to grow as they go through change and disruption. And this mindset of change enthusiasm really nurtures self-actualized growth. And let me just share just a snippet of what it is, right? So it's a 3-step process, and it's a growth mindset. The first step is the signal. The second step is the opportunity. The final step is the choice. The signal are these really difficult emotions like fear, frustration, anxiety, and they signal us into our greatest moments to grow, evolve, and to to learn about ourselves, about our business, about our industry, and how we can become better. And that's the second step, right? This opportunity. And you're learning, how can I maximize this for me? And how can I maximize this for my customer, for my clients, and for my business? And then that last step is the power of choice. The power of choice is one of the greatest tools that we have in our arsenal of humanity. And through choice, we can choose how we then navigate, grow, and inspire others through change. Yeah, so again, I deal with those emotions of change. I have a keynote message that's really focused on all employees. I have a keynote message that's more leadership centric. And the other thing that my messages and convey is not necessarily if you're going through a big change that just hit and you know your organization is feeling a lot of their signal emotions. It's also about thinking about the out years and the fact that change will always be here. It will always be here. And so what it invites is change readiness and that agility, so that when change comes, when growth goals comes, when you have to pivot and be agile, you have a mindset. You have a strategy to employ that if some of those signal emotions do hit, ooh, I'm about to grow. I don't know how, but I'm about to grow. I'm in a moment of opportunity, and it's up to me to choose how to do that. So once you get change enthusiasm integrated into the organization, you become more change ready, more agile, your change initiatives get adopted more quickly, and that energy becomes, it builds momentum across the organization.
Is it easier for smaller companies to react to change than it is for larger companies?
Give and take. I think that some companies, when they're small, I think that agility is helpful just because there's less hurdles to hop over and there's less people who need to give input and have that direction. So that stagnancy that can happen in larger organizations, smaller companies don't have to deal with. But I've still seen smaller companies that are still even fairly new that have this level of resistance to change. And so I would say it varies. I say it doesn't matter the size. It doesn't matter the number of employees. I think that resistance to change, that fear, that anxiety can still persist. And so I think change enthusiasm is relevant no matter the size, no matter the industry.
Someone just wrote in the chat that it would be very interesting to pair you with a futurist, because futurists sometimes can stress an audience out.
That's true.
Like, this is coming and this is coming. And it, instead of it feeling exciting, it can feel overwhelming. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah,
someone else wrote a note in the Q&A, like, what did you learn about change and everything that we went through in the pandemic? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think something that it's been reinforced within me is that the emotions of change are real and they cannot be denied. And of course, I celebrate Brene Brown's work and how she really iterates the fact that we are not cognitive beings. We are emotional beings at our core. And I think what this pandemic has afforded us and what I'm seeing now in my client base is that people are beginning to get that. And this antiquated idea of leave emotions at the door of business is becoming just that, antiquated. And I think you're starting to see more empathic leadership. I think you're starting to see businesses being open to the idea of allowing employees to emote, to recognize and acknowledge those emotions, and then to provide the tools, the platform, and the strategies to leverage that emotion as fuel, right? And of course, that's where my lane is. That's what I'm all about, is empowering those individuals to acknowledge that emotion, know and trust that it's okay. And then how can we get about the business of leveraging it as fuel? How can we transform anxiety into anticipation? How can we, transform fear into hope of all the good and everything that's coming around the corner? But yeah, I think that's one thing that I'm starting to see in my client base. And I literally have clients coming to me saying, I want you to talk about the emotions of change. And I want you to arm my people with a means to acknowledge, embrace, and then transform it into fuel. And so to hear that language played back at me is like, it makes my heart sing.
So you mentioned Brene. I'd love to talk a little bit about other speakers that you get compared to. I know that people have told me that you're very similar to Mel Robbins. And I just think it's helpful when people are in the buying seat to have that frame of reference. So do you have other speakers you might mention that liken to?
I will say that Mel is one that I do get compared to. Fortunately, I've actually shared the stage with her a couple of times, which is great. And I love Mel. I love her. And she, like I, offers very practical application following the keynote. I have worksheets that come with each one of my messages. So, your employees can immediately take what they learn in the keynote and put it into practice. I also get compared sometimes to Bernice, and not necessarily from a topic standpoint, but just from an energy standpoint. And Bernice is my girl, right? So we're both here in Atlanta. So she's a friend of mine, and I don't mind that at all.
Yeah. I was just with, she's referring to Vernice Fly Girl Armor. I'm sure almost everybody on here knows that, but I was just with her a couple of weeks on site, and I told her that you and I had met, and she was just so happy to hear that, because you do both just exude so much energy. So that's a really great technique. I'm really interested in the take-home value, because I always struggle with the term motivational speaker. I don't love it. I'm like, is it motivational? Is it inspirational? Yeah. But what I like is a high energy speaker that has take home value. So I love that that's a part of it. Tell me a little bit about these worksheets. Are they customized for whomever you speak to, or do you have a standard packet? What does that look like?
So typically it is standard, but I can customize, and we certainly do customize. But yeah, when I set off on this journey, I had a couple ground rules for myself. One was to always be me authentically, always bring this light, my energy, my perspective, my ideas to the stage in the big and as bright as way as I could. So that was number one. Number two is to not be a flash in the pan, to not be someone who's going to come in, get people hyped, get people ready to go to breakfast or go to lunch, and then a week or 2 weeks later have forgotten whatever they heard. I did not want to be that individual. And so that's why we've paired each keynote with these worksheets. And honestly, a lot of the exercises are pulled from my book, what you shared at the beginning. They're very practical, because I know when you think about the emotions of change and emotional intelligence, some can find that maybe it's too woo-woo. What I have is very practical, and it meets you from wherever you're sitting. Anyone can practice it and easily apply it. And that's what I'm striving to do with these worksheets, is arm folks with some exercises to pull it from the conceptual, what they'll hear in the keynote, into the practical. How can I make this relevant for my day-to-day? And I love it because it also inspires group discussion following. I've had clients that have had other kind of breakouts, when they come together 2 or 3 weeks later, they use that as an anchor. What happened? How did you execute your action plan? What was inspired? I always invite my audience members to find an accountability partner. So I tell them they need to get matched up with somebody in the next 2 to 4 weeks, talk about what it was like doing the exercises, what came up for them, and begin integrating the language, integrating the mindset. Because of course, when you think about mindset, it's all about building momentum, right? And the more folks you have practicing it, modeling the behavior, then the momentum begins to build, and you can have a meaningful, sustainable impact. And that's what I strive for with every audience.
How do you go about preparing? Do you have a pre-event call? Or do you have a process in place to make sure that you're using all the right language? What's your process?
Yeah, of course. So there is a discovery call typically, which is where I'm getting a first introduction to the client, understanding what is the event, maybe about the changes that they're going through, why they're considering me. And then once we actually are good, that it's a fit for both of us, and we move forward, then there is a content consult, which is anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes. And I like to actually include more than just the initial person that I spoke with. I like to include other leaders in the organization, or either people kind of lower in the organization, so that I can really get a good understanding of what's going through the organization's mind, what are they dealing with, and get the really real. And that helps me with my customization. So in that meeting, I'm kind of spitballing how I think I can integrate my language with a language that's a part of their culture and what their organization is going through. And how can I relay this in a way that it's really going to hit home, that it's really going to resonate. So those are really important. And then there's also, if it is a hybrid event or if it is a virtual event, there's a tech check as well. Now, I've been doing this for years now, I can say years. Done dozens and dozens of virtuals, worked across so many different platforms, but I still like to do a tech check just so I know what platform you're using, making sure you're going to have the chat feature, understanding exactly how I can engage. And so I like to do that, set myself at ease, as well as set the client at ease. And then for hybrid events, I want to know how the virtual component are being orchestrated. I like to have someone on site that's responsible for the virtual audience so that I can engage with them, and they make sure, hey, Cassandra, we got a question in the chat box. So yeah, a lot of that technical and logistics happens in that next call.
So I know you're really active on social. I'm curious, when you speak at an event, what kind of things do people post on social media? Or when people come up and talk to you afterwards, what kind of things do you hear? Because I think that helps us, have a better understanding of how the audiences respond.
What has been so amazing for me, and initially it was profound, this idea that I now see as a reality, that emotion is a universal language. It's a universal language. And so often I have individuals come up to me, talk about where they're at in their anxious journey, where they're at from a fear standpoint, how they are, embarking upon a new role, and there's some anger involved with that. So I get a lot of individual case studies almost after I get off the stage. And sometimes what feels like therapy sessions, which of course I'm okay with, because I love to hear it, right? And it's so interesting, no matter the industry, no matter the individual, no matter what the individual looks like, that universal language of emotion, they speak it, and it connects, and it connects, and it affords all this genuine, authentic connection when I do get off the stage. But it's usually immediate feedback of, I can see how I can start practicing this mindset. I can see its relevance so well. And you know what? When I get back to the office, I think I am in a moment of opportunity. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. So it's almost like they immediately start thinking, wow, I'm feeling this way. What is my opportunity? And they start brainstorming, how can I maximize this? What am I going to do when I get back into the office? Which is dope. It fills me up, right?
How much do you think, having been both that corporate employee as well as the corporate leader, how much do you think that perspective prepared you for sharing this message?
Hugely. I've got so many people who ask me after they see me speak or hear about what I'm doing, they're like, man, don't you hate that it took you this long? Don't you wish you would have started doing this earlier since you're doing so well? I'm like, no. There is no way. I would have the message that I'm relating,
right,
or that I would have the polish, that I would have the understanding, that I would have the perspective that I have if it wasn't for those 15 years. Those 15 years prepared me to do the work that I do today. And I'm so very grateful. And I always tell people, when I left, it wasn't like I was burnt out. It wasn't like I was despising what I was doing. I was having fun, but I was following that curiosity, taking one step after the other. And one day, that next step was my leaving corporate, sunsetting it as I had known it, and going full time into what I now know to be my purpose.
I'm going to borrow that line because I think that's key. So often people do leave because they're disgruntled or burnt out. Yeah, sure. You were thriving.
I was loving it. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
another person that you remind me of, and Bernice and I talked about this, but Carla Harris, because I think, she has so much practical advice. When I heard her recently, I was like, I just wish I could give her talk to every female that's going into the workplace, because I just think she offers so many hints. Yeah. How much do you feel that your message can be geared towards if it is an all-female audience? I mean, do you feel like that's a place where you really identify?
Yes, it's one of my favorite audiences. Is
it?
Yes, of course. I can absolutely relate. And so I love those audiences. And of course, I can fine tune it and talk about personal experiences I've had being, a woman in the corporate landscape, and having to deal with looking for that advancement, having to deal with that male partner or colleague who took my work, who took credit for my work. And so I've experienced those situations, and within that audience, it's very easy for me to put myself right next to them, to sit right next to them in that seat. So yeah, again, I'm so grateful for the experiences that I've had, and to hear those perspectives and those questions, whether it be from a woman, whether it be from a person of color, someone in the LGBTQ plus community, and to be able to relate and identify and look to inspire and support those individuals as best as I can, leveraging my own perspective, I think is very powerful. And I'm so grateful to be able to do as such. I've never had more rewarding of an experience, and I'm feeling it, and I'm seeing it a lot more often, than when I get off a stage and I see a person of color or a woman, or again, a queer person, saying, I am so very grateful that you were here. And it is so cool to see someone who looks like me up on that stage. And they say it because I don't get to see it a lot. So to see
Yeah.
you up there, has made my day, and that fills my cup. That fills my cup.
It's been the most rewarding change I've seen in this industry. I was on the corporate event planning side for 20 years, and then I've had this company for 23. Yeah. And there was a period of time where when people said, oh, we need a diverse lineup, it simply meant we need to throw a woman in there with the rest of the white men.
Yep.
And now I love our clients because they are so conscientious and they understand that the word diversity is a big word with a lot of meaning and a lot of angles. And they are trying so hard. And I try to tell my team, before you send a proposal, I want you to step back and take a look at it. Are we doing our part?
Yes.
Are we doing our part? So,
and I have to give you kudos for that. And I have to thank you for that intentionality and aligning your actions to make that impact. Thank you for doing that. And I want more of our bureau partners to be doing just that. So I so appreciate it.
And we're going to have so many more options now that, to your point, that you're out there and people are seeing it and they're like, I can do that. Yeah.
You got it. And just a quick reminder, maybe it should go without saying, but maybe it does need to be said. Just because it's a person of color who is a speaker does not mean that they are a DEI speaker.
I just had this conversation last week. I'm glad you said it because, we've really struggled with that, because we have a topic in our back office. And I'm like, now, wait a minute. There are speakers that are of color.
Yes.
But then there are speakers that talk about diversity and inclusion. So, So that is not one of your topics.
It's not. It's not. Now, I do talk about resiliency and I do talking about building a resilient and inclusive culture. But my bread and butter is not DEI. A passion of mine is DEI. And I try to do as much as I can to nurture inclusion in corporate businesses all around the world. But of course, my lane is change, resilience, and the emotions of change.
I am really glad you said that. I think because we all continue to learn and fine tune what all of this means. That's great.
Of course, of course.
Well, okay, so somebody asked, how did the pandemic affect your speaking topics for change and enthusiasm? Yeah. And how did you make it relevant since it seemed to interrupt your momentum of bookings?
So the nice part about this is that it's not like I had to make any changes to the core content, to the message.
You just had to listen to it.
You said, what now?
I said, you just had to listen to it. You had to remind
yourself. Had to look. Exactly. I had to practice what I was preaching. I'm telling y'all, March of 2020, and those of y'all, it was bleak. It was
bad.
I took 2 weeks and all I could do was check my email, see all the cancellations coming through, seeing the revenue drop to zero, relocate to the couch, binge Netflix and eat potato chips. That's what I did for 2 weeks in March. But so fortunately, and I'm so very grateful, that's why I say rising to the call, the content, the core of the message didn't have to change. It was a matter of rising to the call and providing the industry with the clarity that this is what I bring, this is what I offer. And the mix of all of that has been phenomenal over these past couple of years.
That's great. Well, you are the easiest person to talk to. I could talk to you all day long. I'm curious, is there any one last message that you have for everybody? Because this is a group of people that plan events and they have that huge responsibility for trying to find a person that they're comfortable putting on their stage in front of their employees, and they want to make sure it's right. So is there anything you want to say to our audience before we wrap up?
Sure. I mean, I'll just say that for me as a speaker, my number one priority is the success of your event and the success of your business and your organization. That's my number one priority. And I'm going to do everything that I can. And of course, impart the message and the expertise that I bring, but to enable that success. And I want it to be long-term. Again, I don't like just being a flash in the pan. And the other thing that I'm seeing now from my client base, and this is what I'll just underline because I mentioned it before, that this is not necessarily just about, we got a big change coming, so we need to have a change speaker come in. This is about nurturing resiliency and being change ready. Change enthusiasm affords that. Yeah.
I love that. Okay. Well, for those of you that have stuck with us today, thank you so much. And if you're interested in checking Cassandra's availability, both for virtual and in person, just reach out to your GDA contact. Cassandra, you're a delight. I can't wait to be in your audience again soon. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Our next GDA Live is on June 6th with Peter Sheehan. So until then, Thank you, Cassandra.
Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you.